it's an evolving process, and you need to be willing to work on that. And you should be willing to work on all those things from Jump Street. And it's very hard. And if you're not willing to, grow and evolve and take feedback and do stuff that's really, really hard, it's not going to work. And I have to do that. And even today, I'm still having to do that and look for ways in which I can make myself better, streamline myself, and make the quality of work that I do a lot better for both myself and the folks that I serve.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schuessler. This week, I'm talking to Dr. Natalie Jones, a private practice entrepreneur in Oakland, California. Listen as she dives into her niche, creating her own podcast, and becoming an entrepreneur. Welcome, Natalie. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Annie.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurial journey. Tell us about your private practice, and let's start with how long you've been in practice and who you see.
Yeah, so my private practice is in Oakland, California. I've been in private practice, I think this March will be 4 years. So I just recently got my own office. It's been a slow climb, and the type of clients that I see. So I specialize in treating a couple different types of clientele. One clientele that I specialize in treating are what people would call criminal offenders, or people who basically get in trouble with the law and have been incarcerated for a number of crimes. They could be violent crimes, drug crimes, fraud crimes. And also I see folks who have been victims of abuse, typically. I specialize in narcissistic abuse, so victims of narcissistic abuse. So where folks have been in relationships that have been very domineering, filled with codependency, just very dysfunctional, unhealthy family or intimate partner relationships.
Okay, and how did you start? Which of those groups did you start working with first, or was it at the same time?
I honestly feel like that's a chicken or the egg question.
Yeah.
Because, in my work, I find that those folks are often one and the same, meaning that the folks who typically get themselves caught up and are incarcerated were at some point victims themselves. Mm-hmm. And so, but anyhow, I feel like it's been a culmination of both. I started out working as a contractor for the Federal Bureau of Prisons and Department of Probation and Pretrial. And so just kind of, I've had a slew of experience since then, and prior to then, I think in a number of agencies as well. But in my private practice, I feel like that's kind of where I started first.
So then it makes me think you have a lot of heart and a lot of skill working with people who some therapists might be intimidated to work with, or might feel like they wouldn't have the skills to work with. Would you say that's true?
I do feel like that's, I do feel like sometimes that population is like, oh, the untouchable, people hear that those folks instead of that population, but those folks, people are just like, oh, I could never do that, or that sounds very serious, or I would be a little bit intimidated by that. So it does require a special type of sensitivity and willingness to work with folks who have those kinds of issues.
So that makes me think that's kind of a superpower of yours, of having a certain kind of sensitivity. And I think that's really cool that you said sensitivity instead of like a thick skin or something like that you're talking about empathy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I do think, yes, it does require sensitivity. There are some cases that require you to be able to hold it together more than others, especially when you're talking about people who've hurt other people in a very serious way. But yeah, I do think it requires a sensitivity, a sense of understanding, and also a sense of being able to balance a lot of different hats, because when these people come to you, sometimes they are mandated, so they don't necessarily want to come. Or, you might even have to be able to talk to other legal professionals, such as attorneys and probation officers or things like that as well.
Okay. And so do you find you have to really build time and energy for that into your practice of talking to other professionals when you're working with people? Yeah.
I do. I do feel like a large part of being in practice, whether it's, whoever you decide to work with, is definitely relationship building and networking. And, but definitely when you're talking about cases like this, trying to build more of a wraparound approach, or saying, some things that are working, things that are not, and, maybe even some concerns that might warrant more of the correctional aspect to kind of look into some things. So that definitely requires a balancing act as well.
Yeah. And so you're not just working alone in your office.
Correct.
And I think that should be true for every therapist in private practice, but it just sounds like it's way more built into the way that you work.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
How are your clients finding you? And I know one thing I want to say is I know you have a really great podcast, A Dance with Darkness.
A Date with Darkness.
A date with darkness, not a dance. And I'm wondering if people are finding you through your podcast yet, or how your clients are finding you.
So yeah, I have had some people reach out to me who have listened to the podcast. I have a really great friend, Dr. Joy Harden-Bradford, who she also mentioned my podcast on her podcast, and her podcast is like 1 million times.
It's kind of like blown up.
Yeah, it's blowing up, but she mentioned it a couple of times and she referenced some of my episodes. So that was very sweet. So people are finding me through her therapy for Black girls. She also has a website. I'm also on that through her therapist directory. People find me via Google, Psychology Today. People Google narcissism, or African American therapists, and that's how they find me typically. For a wide variety of ways. I'm also, other people, colleagues in the Bay Area that know me and know what I'm known for will refer to me and say, hey, I think this client would be a better fit for you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the word narcissism or narcissist, it's been popping up so much more in the last couple of years because of our president.
It is.
And so, or the person who is president, whatever we want to call him. And so what's that been like? Have people been asking you about narcissism more, seeing as this is your area of expertise, and then people are talking so much about whether Trump is a narcissist?
I haven't really, I don't know that I've been asked if Trump is a narcissist. I feel like people, have their own decision about him, like they either feel that he is or he isn't. Mm-hmm. Me personally, I definitely stay away from politics or calling a public figure or trying to put a diagnosis on a public
figure. And we're not allowed to actually diagnose people who we haven't sat with. So so that makes sense.
So those are conversations I pretty much I haven't really had anybody try to engage me in that, but I've seen quite a few people doing it on social media, and I definitely stay away from that. But I also feel like narcissist, it's like this word of pop culture now, so it's kind of like when people were saying, oh, you're so bipolar. And it was like this thing that like bipolar like blew up. And, I feel like every diagnosis kind of goes through a fad, ADHD to bipolar to borderline and, things like that. So a lot of people, don't know the true meaning of narcissist, nor do they really know what narcissistic personality disorder is. They just know that it doesn't mean it means someone who's not good or entitled or lacks empathy. And so it's like an overgeneralization to saying someone is narcissistic.
Yeah. And so it's getting thrown around a lot now.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. What has it been like, Natalie, to step into your new role in the past several months of being a podcast creator and host?
It's very different. I feel like, and this is probably bad to say, I have a love-hate relationship with the podcast.
Mm-hmm. No, that's real. I love that.
I love it. I never run out of ideas and things to talk about, but at the same time, it's also a lot of work.
Yeah.
It can also be very, very expensive. I've hired an editor and, designing the logo, which of course was my idea. And I wanted to have a certain look and, just putting on a production and getting all these things coordinated can be very expensive and time consuming at the same time. I do feel like, I had a very specific idea in mind when I established a podcast. I know what I wanted to do it for, to establish myself as an expert and definitely speak to people about something that I know and that I'm passionate about, help people and give them lots of information, as well as be a person of color who's doing it, which, when I started, it didn't seem to be a lot of people out there. And Joy and I started at the same time. And so we kind of formed this consultation group, but then it just sort of blew up and took on a life of its own. And so podcasting is almost like a separate business. And I think when I went into it, I didn't really understand that. I was like, okay, I'll just do this thing on the side. I'll record, but it's almost like another business, from lining up people to doing research. And, even now I'm changing up things a bit and trying to definitely promote more and have experts on the panel and things like that. So it's definitely almost like I feel like it's almost like a show or something like that.
Yeah, it's big. It takes a lot. And I'm wondering, do you have an estimate of about how much time you end up putting into each episode?
I normally record about an hour for each episode. So recording time is about an hour. And depending on the subject matter, I typically try to research prior to that and make bullets of things that I want to do. Either I research or I'm outlining what I want to talk about. So anywhere from 2.5 hours, and that's a solo podcast. So if I'm doing it with somebody else, I'm definitely, I'd like to do a pre-interview. Everybody does not interview well. And a lot of people freak out. They don't want to be on camera. They don't know, so you have to, I prep my guests to have a better podcast. So that's about 10-15 minute prep before I actually even do that, just to make sure that I'm getting the best interview possible. And then this year, I'm also doing something where I have my private group. And so I'm doing a follow-up interview with them on Facebook Live. So that's about another hour. So, about 4 or 5 hours there. And sending it to the editor, making sure it sounds good, and then him sending it back. So about 4.5, 5 hours. Yeah.
Yeah. And are you creating your own show notes?
I do. I write that as well. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So it's very time consuming.
It is.
Yeah. And what do you think for your podcast? Do you know what your ultimate business goal would be? I know there's a personal goal of, like I have too, of just helping people who are not otherwise going to be able to, get this information, and just being helpful. And then for your business, what do you think your long-term goal is for the podcast? Would it be sponsorship, or would it be just building your practice or other things?
I'm not really sure in terms of sponsorship. It'd be great to have a sponsor, but then I also feel like it would just really take off And again, it's like, sponsorship that requires like another layer. So you have to definitely you have to advertise, and then it's like a really big production then. So I'm at one point I was like, oh, I want to be sponsored. But at then another point I was just like, I'm not sure. Because then I feel like there'd be that extra pressure to perform. But, in terms of my long-term goals for my business and the podcast, definitely to establish myself as more of an expert witness and consultant in working with the folks that I work with. So maybe even being called upon to go to court and testify, and people can really see how much of a knowledge base I have based upon what I'm talking about on the podcast, and my ability to interview other people, which is why I'm I try to be more careful and more diligent, I should say, about my interview style, and being able to talk to people and pull things out. And again, this year I'm going to, it's going to take another interesting turn, because I'm actually going to have people who are self-professed narcissists up there.
Oh, wow.
Being able to interview people and having them talk about some of the offenses or some of the way that they manipulate, and being able to share that with folks, I think it's definitely going to establish me as an expert. It's also going to establish me as a person who's able to talk to folks like this without being judgmental, and just learning from and knowing what to look for, and just establish that education and that knowledge base, I definitely think. And then, just being able to consult, and just, you never know, other projects that may open up along the way. So everything that happens, I'm grateful for.
Yeah. And doing a podcast, it really opens up so many conversations, right? Because having to find guests and having to find the right guests, it means that I'm speaking from how this is for me. It's like you're doing a lot of research and you're finding incredible people who you want to learn more about, and then you get to talk to them. So it's a really great opportunity.
It is. It's pretty awesome. I love it. And, I love being a person of color doing it. Right now, as far as I know, I'm the only person of color who does it, as well as the only person who's doing it in the way that I'm doing it. So I appreciate being first.
Yeah.
And opening up doors and just meeting people. And you just never know, like I said, what happens along the way, because it definitely does take a life of its own. I get to talk to people like you, and people are just so intrigued.
Yeah. And that really can, for anybody who's listening and who's thinking about starting a podcast, if it's something that has people asking you questions, if it's something unique, if it's something that's not being done a ton, those are really great signs.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yes. As you know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got this podcast. It's taking up a lot of time and energy. How many sessions a week do you like to have in your therapy practice?
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Right now, I have about 11 or 12 clients that I'm seeing regularly. I also still work at the prison. So I still am doing my work at a prison where I still work with people who are very much still in the system. So I'm balancing all these hats here. And I have been thinking that I'd like to pull back a little bit from private practice in terms of seeing clients and doing therapy regularly, and again, move more into the expert role and doing more consulting work. And so I feel like in 2018, which is now, that's the way I'm going to be gravitating my practice towards doing that, doing more presenting, and definitely a lot more writing. Is definitely the way that I want to go.
Yeah, and that's what I was just thinking about, public speaking. Yeah, I just interviewed Laura Lewis, who helps therapists with public speaking, and yeah, I mean you're an expert on a topic that scares a lot of people, intimidates a lot of people, and that people want to learn from you about.
Yes. Oh, yes. And
Yeah.
that's exciting and fun,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Good. That's really good. A lot of people are not excited about public speaking. So
Mhm. And that's it. I think it was harder for me when I was in college, but I grew out of it,
Mhm.
so I love talking to be, as you can see, right? Uh, uh,
Well, that must be a big part of it, Natalie, is that you're able to see it just as talking, like you and I are talking right now. So I think if you're thinking of public speaking as just being a continuation of that, that must really help.
it is. I like public speaking, and I'm also a writer and a creator,
Mhm.
just in my spare time. And so I almost think of it as like storytelling as well. So being able to tell a story, people love that. They respond well to that. Whenever you're able to paint a picture and take them down that path with you, they are very excited to do that. True crime and things like that, where life on the dark side is really kind of taking off.
Hmm.
It's becoming very popular. So I think even just talking about this kind of stuff, people really love that. They're excited to do that because of just where society's at right now. And if you can engage them by telling a story and walking them through something that's fascinating, and learning about even the criminal mind or the narcissistic mind, in a way that just paints a picture for them, they love it.
Mm, absolutely.
Mhm.
What do you charge in your private practice right now?
So I just increased my rates to 250.
Hmm. Wonderful. How do you feel about your fee?
I feel like it's still pretty low. And I should probably go up. And so that's what I charge for one-on-one counseling.
Hmm.
For I need to really, this is kind of where my mindset needs to really change for doing the expert witness and the consulting. And so right now for that, I'm charging about 500 for that, but I'm thinking that that needs to go up as well. And just really gearing myself and marketing towards that.
How are you setting your fees right now? Are you in conversation with other people? Because the reason I ask that is that there can be especially for therapists who are working in any kind of social justice realm, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously you are, there can be a pressure to charge less. And so I think that we then also need to be surrounding ourselves and talking to people who want us to charge more. And so I'm wondering if you have that force in your life of, people who are encouraging you to charge more.
I have not been surrounded by people who have been encouraging me to charge more as of yet. The one thing I am doing is I am looking to also hire a coach. So I'm going to hire a coach for expert witness and consulting work to kind of help me to navigate that stream. So maybe talking more about that. As far as I know, most of the people that I've been surrounded by are clinicians or therapists or even psychologists. They don't charge as much as I do. So as far as I know, I'm charging more than they are. And it could be that, you're on the opposite side of the bridge from where I'm at. So you probably are surrounded by people that charge way more than I do. But yeah,
No, not really. I mean,
yeah.
some people do, but I'm really pleased to hear that you're like toward the top end of what I'm
Mhm.
hearing. And that,
Mhm.
that makes me happy.
Hmm. Yeah, and I work, the population I work with is, or I should stop saying population, but the folks that I work with is very specific. It's
Mm-hmm.
very, very,
Yes.
very specific. And I have a very specific treatment, and I typically only treat people at those ends of the spectrum. And so I feel like I've established myself as an expert in that area. I've done lots of training, still continuing to do more training. And so I definitely, my billing or what have you reflects that.
Yes. As
My
it should.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
reflects rent and malpractice insurance and everything in the Bay Area, which is, Bay Area is the number one most expensive place to work and live right now in the
And
country.
what you're offering is so specialized.
Yeah. And so it's, all things considered, it's still for me, it's still on the low end as far as I'm concerned. And so, especially when you start looking at consulting with other professionals. So if you're talking to attorneys, you're writing up reports, you're sending in legal paperwork, that doesn't you need to be able to account for that time.
That's right.
And I'm saying, and so you need to be compensated for your time as well as the liability that goes along with that.
Well, I'm just so happy to hear you charging. You're going to charge more, but I'm happy to hear that you're charging toward the high end of what I hear these days. So, yeah. If people could see me, I'm smiling now. And Natalie, if you could time travel to the start of your private practice, what would you tell the Natalie of that time?
Oh, I would say, private practice is more than just putting up a sign on your door and advertising and taking people's money. A lot of people think that that's what that entails, but it actually entails so much more. When you start a business, and this is also true for podcasting as well, because for me, it is a separate business. There's so much personal development that has to go into that. You really have to take a step back and be willing to look at yourself from an objective perspective in the things that you need to work on. So if you have limiting beliefs, if you are disorganized, if you cannot manage money, if you cannot even manage your practice in terms of staying on top of note writing, being able to consult and talk to other professionals, being able to network, being able to market yourself, being able to talk about what you do, and being able to educate people and tell them why you stand out. That all requires that you believe in yourself, you have a certain amount of confidence, that you leave your anxiety and your personal stuff at the door, and you say, I really need to get in there and work on myself. And even working on yourself mentally and emotionally and psychologically, because I still go to therapy, so that I can have a person that is objective and tells me, hey, this is what you need to work on. Because, the heart and the mind, they don't always match up, but it's an evolving process, and you need to be willing to work on that. And you should be willing to work on all those things from Jump Street. And it's very hard. And if you're not willing to, grow and evolve and take feedback and do stuff that's really, really hard, it's not going to work. And I have to do that. And even today, I'm still having to do that and look for ways in which I can make myself better, streamline myself, and make the quality of work that I do a lot better for both myself and the folks that I serve. Yeah, and so that I can be happy and fulfilled by what I want to do, but also believe in what I do.
Oh, I'm so glad I got to hear that. It's the way that you're thinking about your former self and everything that you'd want to tell her. It's like, it's really highlighting the hard things and the opportunities of being in private practice. That, I think it's such an honor to get to be a therapist and work in private practice. And it's such a huge responsibility to be working on ourselves in all of these ways, our hearts and minds and staying on top of things. And then also all the things you just mentioned about being in business. So it's hard and it's amazing.
It is. And it's also, there's a vulnerability to it. When you're working with people, you're asking them to be vulnerable with you, trust you with their business, trust you with their secrets, and they're going to trust you with the guidance that you're giving them. And so it's the same thing that you have to do. You really have to practice what you preach. And I thought, I'm just going to sit here and listen and write notes and things like. Yeah, it's much more evolved than that. You definitely have to grow into just this person that's willing to continue working on yourself, and you have to be willing to do something different than what other people are doing. People are not necessarily going to be supportive. They're not going to be doing the same thing that you're doing, and people are not going to understand what you're doing. Why are you doing that? And so you have to be willing to be an individual that is able to take everything in stride and learn from it and grow from it. And
thank you, Natalie.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy to get a chance to learn from you. What's the best place for therapists to find you and throw compliments at you?
If they want to find me, the best way to do that is drnataliejones.com. My website, it's got all my social media handles up there. So that's the best way to do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. Such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Annie. I appreciate you being patient with me this morning and my technology issues and having me on the show. I love being up here talking to you.
Thanks for listening to Therapist Clubhouse. Hey, will you do me a favor real quick? Will you please head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show? It really helps other therapists find Therapist Clubhouse. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. Really good.